Hi. I have been asked by the CTIA to appear today to provide my independent assessment of the science related to potential health effects from wireless phones. I'm a senior managing scientist in Exponent's Health Sciences Center. I have 30 years of experience in environmental epidemiology and health risk assessment. I earned a PhD in epidemiology from the University of Oklahoma, and I have a Master of Science in Biostatistics and Epidemiology. Much of my work includes assessing epidemiological research and integrating this information with that from other disciplines for determining whether human exposure can present a hazard to human health. At the Environmental Protection Agency, I evaluated research related to chemical contaminants of air and water. These health evaluations were used to develop standards such as ambient water quality standards, exposure limits. I have prepared evaluations for chemicals, for radio frequency energy, for electric and magnetic fields, and I've published in the peer-reviewed literature. Since 1991, I have been particularly active in updating standards regarding non-ionizing radiation, which includes radio frequency energy like that from wireless phones. I've served on advisory committees to government and regulatory organizations regarding health evaluations of chemicals and of electromagnetic fields. A little bit of background on cellular phones: that mobile phones operate using radio waves. Radio waves, also known as radio frequency energy, is a range on the electromagnetic spectrum that includes broadcast radio, television, and other devices, including cordless phones, baby monitors, radar, and microwave ovens. Visible light is also part of this spectrum, but is at a higher frequency and shorter wavelength than RF. Radio frequency energy is not radiation in the same sense as for high-frequency X-rays, because the energy of RF is lower and unable to change the DNA of cells. There is a standard scientific approach used to determine whether an exposure source, such as radio frequency energy, poses a health risk. This process first requires that all of the published literature be considered, which will include studies that reported effects as well as those that have not. This is the method that I've used for evaluating the radio frequency research and for other assessments throughout my career. In this process, after the literature is compiled, each study is evaluated to assess its strengths and weaknesses, and more emphasis given to studies of better quality because they'll be more reliable. The purpose of this comprehensive review is to be objective. This approach is designed to ensure that reviewers do not single out studies consciously or inadvertently to support a preconceived opinion. As for any health assessment, the relevant research includes many different methods. As we've heard today, this includes laboratory studies in cells, studies in animals, experimental studies of human volunteers, and epidemiological studies in human populations. Each of these approaches has its own specific strength and limitation, and together the studies provide complementary information. And numerous studies using these different approaches have been conducted over the past 50 years regarding RF and health. Several scientific organizations, and these include government agencies as well as professional organizations, have used this procedure to assess the potential for health effects from RF exposure. And some of them have set exposure limits to ensure safety of the public and of workers. These expert groups usually include scientists with different skills to reflect the different research expertise required to answer questions about potential health effects. While the conclusions vary, all of the agency reports that assess the evidence using a comprehensive approach reach similar conclusions: that the current scientific evidence does not demonstrate that wireless phones cause cancer or other health effects. A few examples follow. The agencies that have regulatory authority over radio frequency emissions in the United States are the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, and the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. And they've both reached similar conclusions. The FCC concluded there's not scientific evidence that proves that wireless usage can lead to cancer or other problems. And the FDA states the weight of scientific evidence has not linked cell phones with health problems. The conclusions of these agencies are similar to conclusions reached by commissions around the world, including, for example, the Health Council of the Netherlands, which published a report in 2008. Now, the European Commission has a committee called the Scientific Committee on Emerging and Newly Identified Health Risks, and they wrote a report on RF. The World Health Organization has an ongoing review process. The Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency has recently posted statements on its website, and the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, the International Committee on Electromagnetic Safety, reviewed this in 2005 and is in the process of updating its review. But the most recent one was in 2009. The International Commission of Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection has reviewed all of the evidence, and one section of its report is an epidemiological study by Dr. Album in 2009. In his summary, he wrote, "In the last few years, the epidemiologic evidence on mobile phone use and risk of brain and other tumors of the head has grown considerably. In our opinion," this is the ICNIRP, "in our opinion, overall, the studies published to date do not demonstrate a raised risk within approximately 10 years of use for any tumor of the brain or any head tumor." Based on my review of the epidemiological studies and consideration of the experimental data, I concur with the conclusions of the scientific organization. The current evidence does not demonstrate that phones cause cancer or other adverse health effects.